It was a quiet Saturday afternoon at a small public library on the outskirts of San Antonio, Texas. Shaquille O'Neal had come back in silence, looking for a memory he had left behind 30 years ago. He had once loved a girl here, his first love from high school, the one he had to leave behind when a sports scholarship took him away. But the reunion, with Sarah, now a 48-year-old librarian, was anything but peaceful. The library she had devoted 22 years of her life to was on the verge of being demolished. And Sarah had mistaken this wealthy giant for a real estate investor sent to push her out. That misunderstanding lit the fuse for everything that followed. Explanations that went unheard, the ghost of an old abandonment, and relentless pressure from a construction company with deep pockets. Could Shaq break through the wall of anger to protect the woman he once loved? And what would happen when Sarah opened a 30-year-old journal and read aloud to a group of children about a clumsy giant boy who used to hide in the corner of this very room? The black SUV turned down a narrow lane full of potholes on the quiet outskirts of Pine Creek. The Texas heat was brutal, 39 degrees rising off cracked, grease-stained asphalt. A fine coat of yellow dust had settled across the windshield from the empty lots on either side. Sweat ran down everything it touched. Inside the cramped cab, a giant of a man had to tilt his whole shoulder sideways just to fit. His hand, wide as an iron shovel blade, gripped a worn leather steering wheel. His size 23 shoes were jammed into a footwell that was never designed to hold them. His legs had gone numb from the knees down. The giant was exhausted. The dashboard clock read exactly 2:14 p.m. on a sweltering Saturday. Shaquille O'Neal pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window. His tired eyes closed halfway. He was driving back toward a piece of memory he had spent 30 years trying to keep buried. Everything had changed too much. The small outskirts of San Antonio had become rows of rusted tin rooftops pressed up against each other. Thick, oily smoke drifted from a machine shop at the end of the road and hung in the windless air. Workers in soaked t-shirts moved slowly along the roadside, their steps heavy and dull. They all looked worn down to the bone. Shaq exhaled softly when he spotted a thin woman through his window. She was middle-aged, bent over the curb in the full blaze of the sun, picking up trash with her bare hands. That image hit him somewhere deep. His mother had done this too. Lucille O'Neal had spent her whole life scraping together every dollar she could find to raise her oversized son. Most of what Shaq ate as a child came from the quiet generosity of strangers. He had never once let himself forget where he started, not even sitting on $400 million. Wealth can be a very lonely thing. The SUV rolled to a stop in front of an old red brick building. A wooden sign read Pine Creek, but the paint had long since peeled back down to rotting wood underneath. Shaq folded himself out of the driver's seat and felt the Texas heat slam straight down on his head the second he stood up. He had to bend just to get through the door. The entrance was barely 2 meters high. He had to hunch his whole body down to clear the frame. A small brass bell above the door gave one dry, hollow ring, then silence. Inside, everything was still. The smell of decomposing paper mixed with the cheap scent of floor wax into something thick and stale. An overhead ceiling fan, with 3 blades scraped and whined like a machine giving its last effort. Tiny dust particles drifted and spun through the strips of afternoon light pushing through cracked window glass. This place was slowly dying. From behind the old oak checkout counter came the sharp sounds of an argument. A woman in a gray denim apron was gripping a box of books with both hands. Her curly chestnut hair had gone silver at the roots from years of hard living and harder work. That was Sarah. Standing across from her was a man in a crisp gray suit, without a single wrinkle. His name was Henderson, legal representative for Apex Groundworks, a real estate company with a long and well-funded reach. He tapped one finger on a polished crocodile skin clipboard in a slow, deliberate rhythm. His smile was cold as January concrete. The documents spread across the counter showed a tax debt in red letters, $14,218. Sarah's knuckles went white around the box. Her thin shoulders shook with the weight of everything pressing down on her. This library was the last living piece of Pine Creek, that still mattered. She would not let it go without a fight. She had given 22 years of her life to this place for a librarian's wage. Her personal savings account held $112. The dead-on, that document was not a coincidence. It was a trap, designed carefully to make her walk away. Greed does not need to make noise to be vicious. Henderson dropped the seizure notice onto the wooden counter. It landed with a sharp crack that cut through the room. He spoke in a calm, measured voice, polite on the surface, razor-edged underneath. Monday morning, 10 o'clock. No extensions. No exceptions. No appeals. Time to clear out. Sarah raised her red-rimmed eyes and looked straight at the man across from her. She had nothing left to negotiate with, but she told him she would fight for every single book. The numbers on those legal papers, however, did not care about her intentions. Justice felt impossibly far away. Right then, a massive shadow fell across the entire room. Shaq stood in the doorway. Both Henderson and Sarah spun around at the same time. The man filling the entrance wore a dark hoodie pulled low over his face and a pair of dark sunglasses covering most of his expression. He looked enormous and dangerous. Sarah took one step back. Her hand shot out and grabbed a metal stapler from the desk, pure survival instinct. She had no idea who this man was, but she was certain Henderson had sent him here for exactly this moment. She started yelling. She demanded to know if Apex had sent someone to force her out by muscle. She called him a sellout. She called him a weapon paid for by people who had never gone a single day without eating. Every word drove hard into the quiet dignity of the man standing in the doorway. Shaq went completely still for 3 seconds. His wide chest rose and fell under a faded gray t-shirt. He heard his stepfather's voice surface from somewhere inside him. Sergeant Philip Harrison had drilled this into him since boyhood. Don't be a reaction. Be a response. He breathed out slow and long. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for his name or his money. Instead, he looked at the fury burning in Sarah's eyes, and he saw something else entirely living underneath it. He saw his mother. He saw Lucille, screaming at debt collectors outside their apartment in Newark, shaking with a rage that came from being powerless. His chest pulled tight and hard. Have you ever stood in front of someone you once loved and had them look at you like you were the enemy? That is the kind of pain that no amount of money can even come close to touching. It is its own particular cruelty. He opened his mouth to explain who he was, but the wall between them was already too high and too solid. Sarah raised one arm and pointed straight at the door. She told him to get out of her library right now. Shaq stood still. A single grain of dust drifted down and landed without sound on the shoulder of his worn jacket in the slant of afternoon light. He could have walked away from all of it. He had every practical reason to. But then he heard it, a low, choked sound from behind her. A sob she was trying to swallow before it got out. His feet would not move. Henderson allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He watched the chaos in front of him and decided things were breaking his way. Men with enough money always believe that every obstacle in the world can eventually be flattened by force or fear. He was badly wrong about this one. Shaq reached up slowly and pulled off his dark sunglasses. His eyes underneath were tired, dark circles, worn-down edges, the look of a man who had not slept well in a long time. He did not look at Henderson at all. He looked only at Sarah. Her face was wet, with tears she had not yet allowed herself to shed. 30 years ago, he had left. She had stayed behind. That wound had not healed in all the years between. Sarah had no idea that the man standing in her doorway was the boy she had once loved, with everything she had. To her, he was only a very large and frightening threat. The misunderstanding sat between them like something built from stone. A dry desert wind slipped through a cracked pane and moved through the room, carrying dust and the faint smell of dry fields outside. Overhead, the ceiling fan gave one loud clank, then stopped completely. The air in the room turned heavy and suffocating in seconds. Everything froze in place. Shaq pulled his hood a little lower. He was pressing something down that badly wanted to rise. He took one deliberate step back, giving her more space. His shoulder caught the corner of an old oak bookshelf as he moved. A book fell to the floor. The small sound broke something loose in the room. Sarah looked down at it. A worn fourth-grade reading primer she kept for the neighborhood children. Her hands relaxed slightly. Shaq said nothing. He turned and walked toward the front door. His size 23 shoes hit the floorboards one after another with a low, hollow beat that sounded lonelier with each step. He knew that words were not the tool right now. What this situation needed was something more than words. He would come back. The giant stood beside his black SUV in the dusty parking lot under a flat, gray Texas sky. A small dust devil spun across the cracked ground, carrying dead oak leaves and the tail end of an old cigarette butt. He pressed both hands on his aching knees and stared back at the red brick building. He could not make himself drive away. Every instinct built, from years of growing up, with nothing pulled him back toward that door. He pulled his cap low and pushed through the front entrance of Pine Creek Library for the second time that afternoon. The old brass bell above the door rang its hollow, lonely note into the heavy air. The room was still thick with trapped heat. In the far corner beside the fifth row of shelves, a boy sat cross-legged on the bare floorboards. His name was Leo. He was 10 years old, and he was losing a quiet, painful battle with the words on the page in front of him. His small eyes were red at the edges. His thin fingers trembled each time he tried to turn another page. Leo had a reading disorder. One tear fell and smeared the first letter at the top of the paragraph. Leo slammed the thin book down onto the floor in frustration. It skidded across the boards and came to a stop right against the toe of a size 23 shoe. The boy went stiff with fear. Shaq looked down at the small child. Then slowly, very carefully, he lowered his 6'11" frame all the way down to the ground. Both of his knees cracked under the pressure of 325 pounds. He sat flat on the dusty floor, smoothed out the front of his gray shirt, and made sure his body was angled, so he was not looming over the boy. He smiled at him, gentle, quiet. His wide hand, rough from decades of use, picked the reading book up off the floor without a word. With one thick thumb, he smoothed a bent corner back flat on page 12. Then he brought his large face close, just close enough, and spoke in a voice that was low and warm and unhurried. He told the boy that words had scared him once too. He pointed at a large red letter on the page and sounded it out. Slowly, clearly, then once more. Leo looked sideways at the enormous man beside him, with a face full of suspicion. But the suspicion softened at its edges. He tried the sound himself. He almost got it completely right. The two of them sat side by side against the wall, one enormous and the other barely 60 pounds, under the blue flicker of a dying tube light overhead. Shaq stayed patient through every hesitation. He never rushed the boy. He never showed anything close to frustration. Time in that corner seemed to slow all the way down. From behind the oak checkout counter, Sarah had stopped what she was doing. The metal stapler had slipped from her hand and landed quietly on the desk. She stood completely still, watching. She could not look away. The frightening giant she had screamed at and thrown out of her library 20 minutes ago was now sitting cross-legged on the floor, helping a struggling child find his way through a single page. Something in her chest cracked open just a little. When Leo finally read the entire page out loud, without stopping, he jumped up from the floor, clutched the book against his chest like something precious, and ran off to find his mother at the front. Shaq pushed himself up from the floor, ducked under a low ceiling beam, and moved toward the small round table in the center of the room. He folded his enormous frame into a chair that had been built for elementary school children. The chair groaned under him. His knees came up nearly to his chest. He had to bend his neck forward to avoid hitting the tube light swaying above the table. He pulled a short pencil stub from his shirt pocket and smoothed a crumpled receipt he had found in his jacket pocket onto the table in front of him. He started working through the numbers. $14,218. He turned the figure over and over in his mind, looking for the seams. Something about a small public library carrying that size of a tax debt on this particular patch of land did not add up right. Sarah set a glass of warm lemon water on the table beside him. She did it quietly, without announcement. Then she apologized, not with a speech, just a few plain words, and her voice was rough from the afternoon's fighting. She told him she had misjudged him badly. Shaq took the glass between two fingers and gave her a small nod. He told her in a low voice that he understood what it felt like to be about to lose the one place that had ever made you feel safe. This library, he said, had been that place for him once, during the years when school had been its cruelest. Sarah studied the scar running across his left knuckle. Something about it snagged in her memory, without quite finding its hook. But before she could reach for the thought, the sound of tires screaming against the road outside tore through the quiet. Headlights swept across the wall, through the front window. A heavy flatbed truck pulled into the lot. 3 large men climbed down from the bed carrying metal signs and a toolbox between them. They came through the front door without knocking. The man leading them wore a yellow hard hat and a smirk that suggested he had done this many times before. He was the site foreman for Apex Groundworks. He carried a bucket of heavy industrial adhesive and a roll of bright red warning tape. He announced that Henderson had sent him to seal the library's front face in advance of Monday's demolition order. He was grinning while he said it. Sarah stepped in front of the door, with both arms stretched wide. She told them clearly that the legal seizure order did not take legal effect until Monday morning at 10 o'clock sharp. The foreman shoved her shoulder hard with an open palm. She stumbled backward into the door frame and caught herself on the wood. He laughed at her. Then a shadow came from deep inside the building and swallowed all the light near the entrance. Shaq stepped out from the back hallway and stood in the doorway at full height. 6 feet 11 inches, 325 pounds. He did not say a single word. He simply filled the space completely. Every man outside went quiet at the same instant. The foreman tilted his head back to look up at what was blocking the light. The confident color in his face drained out. Shaq did not raise a fist. He did not issue a threat. He simply stood there, breathing slowly, absolutely still. The 3 men backed up, without being told to move. Shaq's voice came out low when he finally spoke. He told them to pick up the adhesive bucket and leave the property. Not a shout, not a warning with heat behind it, just a plain statement of fact, delivered very quietly. They moved fast. The truck roared out of the lot, throwing gravel and a long ribbon of black exhaust behind it. Sarah leaned against the wooden porch column. Her chest heaved. She looked at the big man standing on the steps brushing dust off his sleeve and felt the last of the fear leave her body. It was gone completely. From the back of the reading room, an old woman shuffled out with a warm smile on her face. Her name was Mrs. Gable. She was 70 years old, nearly deaf from age, and had been volunteering at this library every week for 30 years without being asked to. She placed one small, wrinkled hand on Shaq's forearm. Her trembling voice told him she had recognized him from his voice alone and that she had known it for a while. Shaq went very still. Mrs. Gable leaned close to Sarah's ear and whispered. She told her that the giant standing before them was the boy, their boy, from all those years back. Sarah turned and looked at Shaq directly, fully, for the first time. Something struck behind her eyes. 30 years of memory that had stayed frozen began to move all at once. She could not find a single word. Do you know what it feels like when the most guarded secret of your life rises without warning to the surface? Can wounds that old actually heal? Or do they only learn to stay hidden in the dark? The answer might be sitting inside a blue leather journal locked in the bottom drawer of a desk just a few feet away. The secret was about to come into the light. Night settled over the outskirts of Pine Creek and brought with it a rare desert chill. The yellow street lamp outside threw long, wavering shadows against the library's brick face. Shaq walked back to the small round table and sat down in front of the half-empty glass of lemon water. He breathed out slow. Sarah stood by the 4th bookshelf. Her fingers moved one by one along the spines of old books. She was thinking about the girl she had been at 17, full of plans, an open sky ahead of her, standing in the rain, after school, waiting for a boy who left without saying goodbye. That pain had never fully left her. Shaq knew that his money could fix the number on that tax document in about the time it took to make a phone call. But he also knew what that would cost her. He had seen the pride in her eyes. It was not a small thing. It was the thing she had kept intact through 22 years of low wages and empty bank accounts. He had to be smarter than a check. He needed hard proof that Apex had built that tax debt on forged paperwork. His eyes moved to the old zoning map tacked flat against the brick wall across the room. The property lines drawn on it were faint and faded, but something in the way they ran did not look right. Something was buried in those lines. Sarah walked slowly toward him. The defensiveness that had been in her face all afternoon was gone. She asked him in a low, rough voice why he had come back, after all these years of nothing. Shaq looked at her. His chest rose and settled. He told her that a person can travel a very long way from where he started. But where he started never fully lets him go. This library held the shape of his mother. It held the years when he had been nothing, when being big was the only thing he had going for him, and even that felt like the wrong kind of big. Sarah nodded slowly. One tear moved down her cheek, without her trying to stop it. They were both older now. And older is heavy in its own way. Outside, the night insects were going in the dry brush along the fence line. The library stood quiet and solid in the dark, weathered and cracked and still standing. The faint smell of old lemon oil drifted through the warm, still air. Tonight was going to be a long one. Shaq opened his phone under the table and typed a short, direct message to his lead attorney. He asked for a full financial and legal audit of Apex Groundworks tax records on this particular parcel. He marked it urgent. The response had already started coming. Sarah watched the wide shape of his back disappear between the rows of shelves. She pressed the old brass key to the library door against the center of her palm and held it there. Tomorrow was going to demand everything from both of them, but neither of them was facing it alone anymore. Mrs. Gable gave a light cough and pointed at the pile of scattered papers still lying across the floor from the argument. Her old hands trembled as she bent to pick up the pages one at a time. Shaq crossed the room in 2 long steps and took the weight from her without asking. Gently, without making a show of it. Sarah watched him do it and understood something quietly. Time had changed the outside of this man in every visible way. But it had not touched what he carried inside. She felt something in her chest ease, not all the way, but enough to matter. Hope does not always announce itself. Together, the three of them switched off the flickering tube lights one at a time. The library settled into a near-complete dark. Moonlight pressed through the cracks in the old window glass and lit the top edges of the oak shelves in pale silver. Every book sat still in its place. Everything was as ready as it was going to get. A summer storm was building far out along the Texas horizon. Thick black clouds pressed low over the dry hills north of San Antonio. The air carried the smell of wet sand and electricity, even though the first drop had not yet fallen. Sunday, and the sky looked like it meant business. Inside Pine Creek Library, cardboard boxes were lined up along the center aisle in a row. Sarah was packing the last of the record files into an old, cracked leather suitcase. She dragged the back of her hand across her forehead and kept moving without slowing down. She was preparing herself to lose. Shaq sat in the far corner with the zoning map spread out in front of him. His attorney had come through overnight with exactly what he needed. The file now open on his phone laid out the whole story in numbers that did not lie. Apex Groundworks had inflated the tax liability on this specific land to $14,218, using falsified city records as their foundation. They had manufactured the debt from paper. The library's actual property footprint had been quietly absorbed into a larger commercial zone designation on altered maps. It was a slow, patient, legally dressed theft, and Sarah had never been given a single tool to fight it with. Her bank account held $112. Shaq pressed the short pencil between his fingers until the wood split with a low crack. He thought about the landlord back in Newark who had dragged his mother's belongings out to the wet curb over a contract clause nobody had explained to her. Same move, different decade, same complete absence of conscience. The old pain came back sharp. The clock on the wall showed 5:30 in the afternoon on Sunday. Outside, soft footsteps scraped across the front brick steps. 5 children from the neighborhood appeared one by one at the door, moving slowly and a little unsure of themselves. They came every weekend without fail. This was their place too. Leo came in first. He held the green reading book pressed against his chest, with both arms, like it was something that needed protecting. Behind him came a small girl named Emily, 7 years old, 2 braided pigtails, one shoe coming untied at the heel. The children settled cross-legged on the worn wool rug in the center of the room. They looked up at Sarah and waited. Sarah pulled in a slow breath and held back the sound that was building at the back of her throat. She managed to give them a warm smile. Then she knelt beside the old wooden cabinet in the corner and reached deep inside. She pulled out a journal, blue leather cover, corners worn soft and faded, written in 1996, from the years when she was still young and the world still seemed to have room in it for her. It was old enough to carry real weight. Shaq moved his wide frame quietly into the shadow behind the 4th bookshelf. He pressed his back flat against the cool brick wall and went completely still. He did not want the size of him to pull focus away from what Sarah was about to do. His chest locked up tight. Sarah opened to the first yellowed page. Her voice came out warm, but unsteady in the still room. She began to read about a boy, an enormous, clumsy, gentle boy who had walked into her life one unremarkable afternoon. He had hands so wide he tore the pages whenever he turned them too fast. But he was kind. He was genuinely kind. This boy used to hide in the back corner of the library because the other kids at school had a way of finding whatever was weakest and pressing on it. He used to split his small, cold meatball sandwich with the girl at the front desk because he could see she had not eaten. 2 children with nothing to spare had read their way through entire worlds they could not afford to visit any other way. They had been happy in this corner. Sarah's voice fell lower as she turned to the last written entry, the day before he disappeared. He had been offered a full athletic scholarship. He had to take it. His family needed him to take it. He had told her he would come back. Life had moved too fast to keep that promise. In the shadow behind the 4th shelf, Shaq's face was wet. His wide shoulders moved once, a single hard shudder he could not stop. He thought about the bus he had boarded without turning around. He had told himself at the time that it was the only right choice. That had been true, but true does not always mean painless. The regret had been living inside him for 30 years without a name. Sarah raised her eyes from the page and looked directly into the dark corner where he stood. The dim light from the one working tube above her caught the left half of his face. She knew. The children turned and looked where she was looking. They saw the large man standing in the shadow. They saw that he was crying, without making any sound at all. The room went completely still. The storm outside had grown loud, but inside the library, nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Sarah closed the blue journal. She crossed the floor one careful step at a time. Her thin hand reached out and touched the edge of his gray shirt near the hem. Her voice barely made any sound at all. She spoke his name, the one from before all of this, the one from when they were both nobody. Shaq stepped out of the shadow. He bent himself down slowly, until his face was level with hers. He did not offer her an explanation for 30 years. There was no explanation that would cover that kind of time. He simply nodded. She held on to his wide shoulders and cried the way a person cries when they have been holding something in for far too long and the walls finally give way. He put both of his large hands on her back, lightly, like she was something that could break, and told her he was sorry. The words came out barely above a whisper. He was finally back. Do you still believe that something broken can find its way home after 30 years? Can love that started with nothing, no money, no certainty, barely enough food, survive everything the world throws at it? What was about to happen next was not only the healing of 2 people, it was the beginning of a fight. And the storm outside was getting louder by the minute. The children watched the 2 adults hold each other, and something in them, even at 7 and 10, understood, without needing words to explain it. Leo stepped forward and wrapped his thin fingers around the hem of Shaq's jeans. Outside, the first real drops of rain hit the rusted tin roof of Pine Creek Library. Texas rain. Hard and without warning. Shaq's phone vibrated in his pocket. His attorney had finished the full financial review of Apex Groundworks. The evidence was solid and clean. The company had paid off a city records employee to alter the land boundary designations currently on file. Every transaction was documented and time-stamped. Sarah wiped her face with the back of her wrist, and looked at Shaq, with something entirely new in her eyes. She was not standing alone anymore, and the knowledge of that was visible in her whole body. The man she had screamed at and thrown out 2 days ago had become the steadiest thing in the room. She was not going to quit. Outside, the sky turned completely dark, and the rain came down in wide white sheets across the empty lots and the dry fields. Thunder moved through the building's old frame. The smell of wet earth pushed through every crack and gap in the walls. The room smelled like rain and old wood, and something that might have been relief. Shaq gathered the children back around the table. He opened Leo's green book and picked up where they had left off the day before. His voice filled the room, steady, low, unhurried, and cut cleanly through every boom of thunder that rolled outside. The children leaned in close around him. Sarah stood beside the table and watched. She looked at the children's faces. Then she looked at his, and something she had been carrying in her chest for 30 years, heavy and unnamed, finally set itself down. The anger was gone. While he read aloud to them, Shaq was running calculations through his head at the same time. He was not going to write a check and quietly hand the library back to her. That was not the right move. It was the easy move. His attorneys would bring every falsified document Apex had ever filed into open court under full daylight. They would answer publicly for all of it. Mrs. Gable came out from the back room carrying a plate of butter cookies she had baked at home and brought and wrapped in a cloth. She set them in the center of the table and looked down at the enormous man sitting on the floor below table height. Her wrinkled hand rested briefly and warmly on top of his head. He smiled up at her. By 7 o'clock the rain had eased off. Parents came in ones and twos, still wearing their damp jackets, to collect their children for the night. They looked at the large man standing quietly near the door with curiosity, and then they nodded with the kind of respect that does not need words behind it. Word had already traveled through Pine Creek. The library went still. Just the two of them now, under the soft yellow light of the one remaining working bulb. Sarah asked Shaq in a quiet voice if he would be there in the morning when the machines arrived. He looked at her and placed one wide hand gently over her thin shoulder. He would be there, he said at once, simply. A sleepless night was waiting for both of them ahead of Monday's fight. Shaq locked the front door and threaded the old iron chain through the handle. Henderson would come with everything he had in the morning. But Shaq would not be leaving overnight. The moon laid a pale stripe of light across the library floor through the window. Shaq settled himself against the cold iron of the old wall radiator and sat with his knees pulled up. Sarah was at her desk, carefully wrapping the last remaining books in brown packing paper, one by one. They did not sleep that night. She asked him about the years, the lights, the enormous crowds, the sound of 20,000 people saying his name at once. He looked at his hands for a long moment before answering. He told her about nights that were quieter than they should have been, no matter how loud the city got just outside whatever window he was sitting near. Money does not fill everything in a person. Sarah gave a soft, worn-out smile. She understood it completely. He had been carrying a weight that nobody in those arenas ever had any reason to guess at. And he had carried it the entire time, without putting it down. She forgave him, quietly, without ceremony or conditions. That was enough. Monday came in slow and gray over San Antonio. The sky was the color of ash from one end to the other. A wet chill sat in the air that the Texas sun had not yet burned away. The clock inside Pine Creek Library read exactly 8:30 in the morning. There was very little time. Then the sound of a diesel engine came rolling in off the main road. A yellow excavator rumbled down the lane on steel treads, black exhaust pumping straight up from the stack. The tread plates ground into the pavement with a low, steady, relentless boom. They had come as promised. A Ford F-150 led the convoy into the grass lot. Henderson stepped out of the passenger side in his pressed gray suit and polished shoes. He was carrying his crocodile skin clipboard and a look of complete certainty across his face. He believed this was already done. Sarah stood alone on the front brick steps. Her hands were locked around the iron railing. The morning wind pushed through her silver-streaked hair. She did not step back. She did not flinch. She held her ground alone. Henderson walked toward her and swept his eyes across the empty lot with visible satisfaction. He asked where the big man had gone to. He said it with a smirk. That men built big usually disappeared the fastest when the real pressure showed up. He laughed at his own joke. 2 county sheriff's deputies moved forward from behind the convoy. They told Sarah in flat, official voices to vacate the property before the enforcement order took full effect. One of them grabbed her arm and pulled her down from the steps. She cried out from the pain. Could you watch that happen and not move? Could you stand still and watch a decent woman get dragged off the steps of the place that she built with 22 years of her life? Every person watching in that moment wanted exactly one thing. It felt like everything was caving in. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut. A tear pushed hard down her cheek. She heard the excavator engine rev behind her. The steel blade began to lower toward the ground. She stopped fighting. She let her head fall. The machine lurched forward one lunge. The diesel smell hit every person in the lot at once. The steel tread ground into the edge of the brick path, less than a meter from the bottom step. Almost there now. A car horn blasted across the lot. The black SUV cut hard across the grass and stopped directly in the path of the moving excavator. Henderson's entire convoy froze. He spun around trying to work out who had just parked a vehicle in the path of his equipment. Everyone stared at the car without moving. The engine idled low. The door stayed closed. Henderson stormed over and slapped his palm flat against the window glass, hard. He demanded whoever was inside come out right now. Sarah looked at the car. Her grip on the deputy's wrist softened. She knew this car. She had watched it leave the parking lot yesterday, and she had not been certain it was coming back. Please, she thought. Please. The door swung open. Size 23 shoes hit the wet morning grass with a solid, grounded sound. Shaq stood up to full height in the flat morning light. 6 feet 11, 325 pounds, gray hoodie, nothing fancy, nothing meant to impress. He looked at them. He saw the red mark around Sarah's wrist where the deputy had grabbed her. His jaw went tight. His chest filled up with something that wanted out fast. Philip Harrison's voice arrived in the same second. Don't be a reaction. Be a response. He let the breath out through his nose. Henderson stepped into the open space between them. He had to crane his neck back to hold eye contact with the man in front of him. He shoved the seizure order paper toward Shaq's chest. He said the demolition had been fully authorized by the court. He told Shaq to step out of the way. Now, Shaq did not look at the paper. He held eye contact with Henderson for 3 full, silent seconds. Henderson felt something go cold along his spine without understanding why. The morning dew gathered on the wide shoulders of the man standing in front of him. Not one person on the enforcement crew moved. Not one of them spoke. The power of the stillness was something none of them had thought to prepare for. They stepped back on their own without being asked. Then Shaq raised one large finger and pointed toward the main entrance of the lot. Sirens. And they were getting close fast. A line of black SUVs turned through the main entrance, followed close behind by 2 federal law enforcement vehicles. Henderson spun around. He had no explanation for why federal agents were pulling into a library parking lot in a small Texas neighborhood on a Monday morning. He was about to have one. For attorneys in dark press suits stepped out of the black vehicles. They carried thick document folders under their arms. The one leading them was the most respected land fraud attorney in the state of Texas, retained by Shaq 2 days earlier. He walked directly to the senior county deputy. He presented a federal emergency injunction. The order required all demolition and seizure activity to halt immediately, pending a full federal investigation into Apex Groundworks tax filings and land record alterations. Henderson's face went blank. He took the document with both hands. He read it once. He read it again. His crocodile skin clipboard slowly lowered to his side. His face did something that morning that it had not done at any point over the entire weekend. It went completely empty. Henderson stood in the grass lot holding the federal injunction, case number 4217, in both hands. The red seal of the federal court was pressed clean and sharpened to the top of the first page. The face of the man, who had arrived on Saturday morning, with everything locked and loaded, now looked like cooled ash. There was no next move. The lead attorney stepped forward and cut off Henderson's first attempt to speak. He stated clearly that the full $14,000 tax debt against this property had been frozen pending a federal financial audit. The evidence of bribery, specifically payments made to a city records employee to alter official zoning maps on file, had been documented, submitted, and accepted by the court. Everything was on the official record now. The two county sheriff's deputies quietly reholstered their equipment. Neither of them was prepared to become an accessory in a federal fraud case over a public library. Both took several careful steps back from the center of things. They said nothing and withdrew. Henderson's knees buckled. He went down, onto one knee in the wet grass. The crocodile skin clipboard slipped out of his hand and landed in the mud beside him. Every plan he had built around absorbing that commercial parcel on the edge of San Antonio's outskirts was gone. He looked up at the large man in the gray hoodie standing above him. He finally understood who he had been dealing with all along. Shaq looked down at the man, without a single trace of satisfaction on his face. He had not made this trip for a win. He had come back for something much older than any legal dispute. He let one long, slow breath out and felt the weight of 2 days lift off his shoulders like something physical. It was finished. Sarah stood at the iron railing, with both hands wrapped around it. Tears ran freely down her face, without her trying to slow them. She looked at Pine Creek Library, still standing, still whole, still hers, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time move through her entire body. Real relief. The deep kind. Shaq came up the front steps slowly. He put both hands on her thin shoulders. He told her quietly, one sentence, no extras, that no one was going to come back here and try this again. This place belongs to you. The yellow excavator reversed out of the lot in retreat, leaving 2 long, deep tread marks pressed into the soft ground behind it. The enforcement crew loaded their red warning tape into the truck bed without looking at anyone. The diesel smell faded into the clean, cool air of the morning. The library breathed. Mrs. Gable pushed through the front door and wrapped both arms around Sarah. The two women held each other and cried without trying to stop. Then the old woman turned to face Shaq. She pressed both hands together in front of her chest and nodded to him. Shaq bowed his head back to her. You might think that this is where the story ends. The library saved. The fraud exposed. The debt cleared. But the real victory was never about the money, even though Shaq had more than enough of it. It was about giving a woman back her dignity in a way that did not make her feel like she owed anyone anything. That is its own particular kind of love. A week later, the sound of hammers and saw blades filled the air over Pine Creek. Local workers from the neighborhood, people who lived within walking distance of the library, had been brought in to handle the repairs. New shingles went over the rusted tin. The cracked window glass came out in pieces and was replaced. Fresh oak planks covered the soft spots in the floor where the wood had given up. The smell of new paint and lemon oil drifted through the warm Texas breeze together. This place was coming alive again. Shaq was not watching from the side. He was carrying lumber himself, 100-pound oak beams, 2 at a time, across the grass lot under the afternoon sun. His shirt was soaked through. He laughed with the workers around him like he had known every one of them for years. He was part of what was being built here. The old rotted sign above the entrance came down carefully. In its place went a new panel of smooth pine, hand-carved, painted in gold lettering, that caught the light. Lucille and Sarah Community Learning Center. His mother's name first, then hers. Together, at the entrance, where anyone who walked up could read both of them. A quiet way of saying everything that mattered. Sarah was named permanent director of the center, with a salary that matched the 22 years of work she had already put in, just finally paid properly. There was no ceremony, no public announcement. Shaq listed himself in the official paperwork as a community partner. She was not receiving charity. She was being recognized for something real. The reopening was held on a Saturday afternoon, with a warm desert wind moving through the lot. Dozens of families from Pine Creek came out in their best clothes. Children's voices echoed off the freshly finished oak shelves, the real sound of a building being used exactly the way it was meant to be used. Leo walked up to the small wooden platform at the front of the room. He held his green reading book in both hands. He read the first full page aloud, clearly, without stopping, without stumbling once. His mother covered her mouth with both hands and looked at the ceiling. Shaq watched from the back corner. Their corner, the same dark spot beside the fourth shelf, where two kids, with nothing, had once read their way through entire worlds on Saturday afternoons. Sarah stood beside him. She asked quietly if he had to be somewhere soon. He looked at her. He shook his head once, slow, easy. He was staying a little longer. As the last families filed out, through the repaired front door, into the golden afternoon, the center went soft and quiet. The smell of old books and new wood settled together into the air. A breeze came through the clean windows and moved through the room without rush. Sarah sat across from him at the small round table, reinforced now, solid underfoot. They did not need many words between them. They had already said the ones that mattered. They opened the blue journal together. The pages were still yellowed at the edges. The handwriting was still hers, teenage, round, full of a girl who had believed in things without needing proof. The two of them read through it in quiet. A past that had felt for 30 years like nothing, but lost slowly became something else. It became the beginning of what was still ahead. Shaq looked out through the new window glass toward the old pine trees bending in the evening wind. He thought about Lucille. He thought about her watching all of this from somewhere above, watching her son come back to where he started and choose to use everything he had built to protect something small and real and worth protecting. He hoped she was proud. He believed she was. A small grain of dust drifted down and settled on the open page between them. Sarah placed her hand over his, her thin, worn fingers resting across his wide, rough knuckles. The warmth from her hand moved through both of them like something steady and quiet. Time slowed all the way down. The story of the giant and the library on Pine Creek will be told in this neighborhood for a long time to come. Not because of the money that stopped a bulldozer, but because of the choice one man made to come back and to use everything he had to protect something small and real and worth protecting. Every book on those shelves holds something now. The shape of a boy who was afraid of words, and a girl who let him be afraid, without making it smaller than it was. The shape of two people who found their way back to the same corner. One more time. The night wind came up across the San Antonio fields, dry and warm, carrying the smell of cedar and the sound of insects settling into the dark. The center was quiet and still. The streetlights outside threw long, soft shadows through the clean glass. Sarah had fallen asleep at the table without meaning to. Her head was resting on her arms beside the open journal. The tight, worried lines that lived in her face every other day of the year were gone. She looked at peace. Shaq sat beside her without moving. He held everything in his body still. He reached across very slowly, with both large hands, and laid his jacket over her shoulders, inch by inch, careful as anything, so that not even the weight of the fabric would wake her. He sat back and watched her sleep. The lamplight from outside threw two shadows up on the brick wall above the shelves. One enormous, one small. Together, they fit perfectly in the space. Tomorrow he would have places to go. The world outside Pine Creek did not slow down for anyone, not even him. There were meetings, obligations, distances to cover. But for right now, in this room, he was exactly where he needed to be. Not a superstar, not a billionaire, just a man from a hard place, sitting in a library that had almost disappeared next to a woman who had stayed when he could not. He was not lonely anymore. Mrs. Gable turned off the last light in the back hallway and stepped outside onto the brick porch. She looked up at the wide Texas sky, full of stars that burn every night whether anyone stops to look at them or not. She smiled. The children of Pine Creek would grow up with books now. They would grow up knowing that someone came back for them, not with cameras, not with a press release, not with a number followed by a lot of zeros, just with a car, a team of lawyers, and a willingness to sit down on a dusty floor and sound out words one more time. That kind of thing stays with a person for the rest of their life. The mission was complete.